Thank you for joining today's webinar. We'll begin in just a minute. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We appreciate you tuning in. Today we are going to be talking about billing meters and what those are and how to set them up. My name is Scott McCauley, and I will be taking you through today's presentation, or today's Print Tracker University learning session on billing meters. Just as a quick reminder for those of you who have been on our webinars before, and a notice for those who haven't, all of our webinars are recorded. They're available on YouTube to go back and rewatch. They're open to be shared with anyone on your team that you think might benefit from viewing those. We send out an email each week with the upcoming webinar schedule, as well as links for past webinars. However, if you want, you can go find our YouTube channel. All you need to do is just go to YouTube, search for Print Tracker, and you'll find our channel here. You can subscribe to get notifications on upcoming webinars, and you can see a list of past webinars here, along with some other training videos that have been posted. And again, this will continue to build out as we continue to hold these weekly webinars. So that's a great resource to review any materials we've already covered, as well as help anyone on your team that wasn't able to attend live to be able to go back and review the information. I would also encourage you during our webinar here to use the chat feature. Feel free to ask any questions that you might have in the chat window, and if we have time at the end, we'll take care of those during the webinar. If not, we'll be sure to follow up with you with answers to your questions. So with that covered, we'll jump in and talk about billing meters. So in the new Print Tracker Pro system, billing meters are just that. They're the meters that dealers find important to use for billing. And obviously, devices can capture multiple different types of meters. And so it comes down to an issue of what do you as the dealer want to bill off of? Because Print Tracker, what we'll do is we'll go and we'll capture and save all of the meters that we can find for a particular device. Most of those might be meters that you don't care to bill on, but might want to look at for maybe some contract analysis or things like that as you consider future contracts. Maybe you want to change the type of meter you're billing off of. And so we'll capture all of the data, we'll store it in there so you can do ad hoc analysis at any point, but you can pick based on your contract today, these are the meters that we're billing off of, and this is what we want to see in the Print Tracker system. So to walk through billing meters, we're going to look at a particular device. So if I come into the web admin, and again, that can be found at app.printtrackerpro.com, you log in and it will take you to your dealership. We're working with our fake dealer here called My Dealer. I'm going to navigate to a customer here called PPM, and I'm going to come over to view my devices. And we're going to work with this HP M454 today. So if I open up this device, I can see a list of meters right here that are currently set for my billing meters. So that would be the total, total black, total color, and total prints counters. If I come over to the settings tab, I can open up this billing preferences option, and we can see that there are two components here to my billing meters. I have a formats section and a counter section. The counters are the meters that the device collects and reports on. And that's things like, as you can see, things like total prints versus copies, total page counts, black versus color, faxes, scans, devices that report 3-tier colors. You've got your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Those are all different meters or counters that are available to be modified in the Print Tracker Pro system. So the next section here is this idea of formats. And in order to cover this, we're actually going to look at a number of different formats on the actual device itself. So I'm going to come over here, open a remote technician page. For those of you who haven't been able to attend a previous webinar, Remote Technician is a feature that allows you to access any device's web page remotely so that you can view the actual embedded web server as if you were inside the customer's network. One of the nice things that these device web page shows are counter pages. In this particular case, we can find that report over here under the usage report. And we can see that this particular HP has a number of different counters that it reports. We can see that it's got total pages printed here, gives you black and white versus color. But then down here at the bottom, it also provides a black and white, a color, and a total. But these are the equivalent impressions. So obviously equivalent is taking into account different media sizes, like legal is going to get weighted a little bit higher because it's a larger page and is using more consumables versus, a 4x6 photo is obviously going to be a smaller media size, and so it gets weighted differently. And depending on the way your contract is written, some dealers want to bill off of equivalent impressions. Other dealers, for some reasons, might have their contract set up to bill off of these impressions that are not equivalent. So if we look at this particular device, we can actually see three different totals. There's a total engine page count. There's this total pages printed that is a non-equivalent value, and then there's a total pages printed that's an equivalent value. Print Tracker will go through and will collect all of those values and store them in the back end, and then give you, as the dealer, the flexibility to pick which one of those formats you want to bill off of. So again, you can choose the equivalent format, you can choose the engine format, or you can choose what we call a life format, which is essentially a non-equivalent or kind of a catch-all bucket. If the device doesn't specify whether it's equivalent or not, we put it into kind of this catch-all bucket that's called life. And so, again, we'll collect all three of those formats on this particular device, and then you can go through and say, based on the way our contract is written, we want to bill off of this, we'll say this equivalent meter in this example. So how do we go about actually making that change? If we come back over to our device, we can see on this settings page under billing preferences that we have this format, and right now it's set to collect the life meter, which again in this case will be this 11,229. But if we want to change it to collect this 11,190, all we have to do is come up here, remove life, and say, I want to use the equivalent meter or the equivalent format. And you can see that there are a number of other formats available in here, including things like square feet or meters, linear feet or meters for some of your large format devices. We capture a number of different formats of meters. In this case, we'll go ahead and select the equivalent option. Again, we can come down here and we can modify any of these counters that we want. We can add some or remove some if we want to limit what shows up on the overview tab of our device. In this case, I like these counters, so I'm going to leave those in there. One other thing that you can do that is sometimes necessary is to add an offset to a particular meter. So in some cases, you might have to reset the hardware or swap out a motherboard or something on the machine where it modifies the counters themselves. So let's say you've gone along, you've been billing the customer at 100,000 pages, and now all of a sudden you've had to modify the hardware on the device and those counters reset back to 0. You don't want to start uploading meters starting at 0, because that's obviously going to mess up your billing, where your billing meter drops from 100,000 pages down to 0. What you can do is you can come click on any of these meters and add an offset. So in our case, we say, well, we swapped out some internal component at 100,000 pages. I'm going to add that offset. And now we can see that anytime Print Tracker uploads a total meter, it's going to take whatever it received from the device and add 100,000 pages to that, and that's going to become the meter value that shows up in Print Tracker. You can do the same thing in reverse. If for some reason you need to reduce a counter, you would just add that as a negative value. So these meters are fine. I'm not going to save that offset because this device is reporting just fine. But we do want to switch from equivalent to, from life to equivalent. So I'll make that change. We'll come down here. We'll save that setting. And now the next time our device uploads a meter, we'll switch from using the life format, which is what it's using right now, to using the equivalent format, which would report that value of 11,190 pages. So that's all it takes to modify your billing meters, is to go in on a device, change the format or the counters that you want to report, hit save, and then the next time Print Tracker uploads a meter, you'll see these values change to that new format. But again, Print Tracker is going to store all of the formats in the database. So if you ever need to go back and do a comparison to say, well, what if we switched to billing this contract instead of using a life meter? What if we switched it to using an equivalent meter, or one of the other formats, things like that? You can go back and do historical comparisons between the two meter values, and maybe that changes the way that you approach your next contract. In terms of what you choose to bill off of. So one other aspect of these billing meters is if you are a Canon dealer, you can turn on this show Canon meters, and what it will do is you can see that it adds the Canon meter code next to this total. So based on the fact that we've selected equivalent as our format, when we upload a total for a Canon device, it's going to use the 102 meter. The total black will use a 109. The total color will use a 124. If we change this to life instead, we can see that the next time we upload a total meter, it's going to use the 101 Canon meter, the 108 for the black, and the 125 for the color. So again, as a Canon dealer, this can just, you can verify that Print Tracker is uploading the exact Canon meter that you're interested in just by turning on that toggle. So now let's say that we want to set up defaults for our dealer. Let's say, as a dealership, we always bill off of equivalent. How do I set that as my default billing preference for the full dealership? So the way that you do that is if you navigate up to My Dealer, because we're going to set this as a default on the dealer level, you can come down to this admin section, Manage Entity. We have a settings tab that looks just like the settings tab on a device, but this is going to apply to the dealership. So we can see here that we have a billing preference section again. But if we look at this, we see that we have two different options here in this format section. What that does is that says we recognize that not every device is going to report an equivalent meter. Not every device is going to report a square feet meter or an engine count or a life meter. So what you can do as a dealer is specify kind of an order of preference. So what this will do is it will say for any new device that gets discovered at my dealer, if we have an equivalent meter available, report that. If we don't have an equivalent meter available, move on to my second preference, which in this case is life. And if we have a life meter, then it will report the life. So this allows you at a default level to say, we care about equivalent, use that first if it's available. If not, fall back to one of these other options. And this kind of a preference can be set at the dealer level, but then you can also override that if you, let's say maybe this EV1 customer, we don't use equivalent meters because that's the way the contract is written. And so we don't want to use equivalent. We only want to use life here. So I'll remove equivalent. And if I were to save this, then any new devices that get discovered at EV1, they will skip any equivalent meters that might get discovered, and they will only report the life meter. So that's the way that you can set a default at the dealer level. You can set up an order of preference to say, try this first. If it doesn't exist, fall back to this secondary selection. And you can also overwrite that at a customer level. And obviously, you can overwrite that on an individual device basis, depending on the way the contract is written for that particular device. I do want to emphasize the fact that making changes to your defaults at the dealer level or at a child customer level will not affect any existing devices. So if I were to go up to my dealer level and say, we don't actually want to have new devices report equivalent meters, and I remove it from here, it's not going to go modify any existing devices. The reason for that is in a lot of cases, there can be a pretty significant difference between the equivalent number and a life number. And if you make a change at the My Dealer level, you might inadvertently have a change in your billing value for one of the devices. And obviously, if you have a large spike from 1 month to the next in a counter, or a large drop from one month to the next in a particular value that you're billing your customers off of, that can create either a lot of heartburn for your billing department or for the customer if they see a big spike in their invoice. And so anytime you make a change to the defaults at a dealer or a customer level, it's not going to go affect any of your devices so that you don't get big spikes in counters or big drops in counters. So these billing preferences only apply to new devices that get discovered on the account. If you need to go change an existing device, obviously you can just navigate to that device, modify the billing meter, but then you're explicitly saying, yes, I recognize there's going to be a change in the way that we're billing this particular device. And everyone's comfortable with that. Everyone understands that there's going to be either a spike in the counter or a drop in the counter because we've chosen to bill off of a different format. So just wanted to make that clear that changes to the dealer or the customer level will not impact existing devices. So that kind of concludes the deep dive into our billing meters. Kind of what they represent and how to modify them. These next several webinars, we're trying to keep to about 30 minutes, make them brief. So I am going to jump in and see if we have any questions that have come up in the chat. And it looks like there are no questions at this point. So if you do have questions, feel free to reach out to our support team. I'll put up the support email address at the end. Just as a note, we do have a couple more webinars that have been scheduled. Next week, we'll have one on November 2nd. It will cover billing reports. Again, it'll be about 30 minutes or less. And this will cover, now that we have all of the meters set up that we want to bill off of, how do I actually get those meters delivered to my billing department, or maybe the end customer wants to see the meters that we're billing off of. How do I create a report and have that emailed out on an automated process? So that's the topic that we'll cover next week. The following week, we'll go and take a deep dive, again, about 30 minutes or less, into how do we use hierarchy effectively. So how do I use it to control who has visibility into what in Print Tracker? How do I use it to apply default settings and overwrite those in places where that makes sense? So we'll do a deep dive into effectively using your hierarchy the following week. We send out emails every week with the next several webinars scheduled out. If you aren't receiving those emails, just shoot a note to our support@printtrackerpro.com email inbox, and we'll make sure to get you added to it. Again, you can access the web admin there at app.printtrackerpro.com. We've got our documentation site available as well at docs.printtrackerpro.com. And we appreciate you tuning in. And as always, feel free to reach out with any questions. Thank you so much.